We've looked at forgotten video game firsts before. In other words, this isn't a first, this topic. Oh, how confusing. And in doing so, we unintentionally caused a problem. Thanks to the fact that we covered them, they are no longer forgotten firsts. Being as they're now technically remembered firsts, thanks to us, which is nowhere near as interesting, we thought it would be a good idea to make another list of firsts that are still, at the moment, forgotten. Although that means that these firsts are also going to be remembered too now, right? Oh, this feels like the beginning of a never-ending loop. As with the previous list, these overlooked milestones can be absolutely anything to do with the industry. That includes the games themselves, studios, consoles, marketing, you name it. As long as it's the first of its kind and tends to go undiscussed, it's fair game. Also, let us know which firsts you'd be interested in knowing in the comments. We've started the never-ending loop, so we might as well finish it, am I right? Actually, can one finish a loop? Oh god, I've got a headache. I'm Peter from TripleJump, and here are 10 more forgotten video game firsts. Jesus. Number 10. First game to get a 0 from IGN. Olympic Hockey Nagano 98, 1998. IGN may not be everyone's cup of tea, and we certainly are not suggesting that it either should or should not be. Like any large outlet with regular coverage, there are bound to be review scores that you disagree with. In fact, you're thinking of a few of them right now, and so I'm not singling them out to belittle them because someone's opinion was different from mine. That's appalling behaviour, in fact, so do not do that, anyone. That's my opinion! However, we have long said that 0 ratings are sort of bunkums. If the game turns on, it doesn't deserve a 0. 0 implies not a bad game, but a complete failure of functionality. But I digress. The point is that our natural feelings on 0s led us to wonder about the first game to which IGN gave that rating. It turns out they have actually only given 2 0s ever. The most recent is for The Walking Dead Michonne, which is an interesting choice. Whatever you may personally think of that side story to Telltale's main Walking Dead games, I can at least assure you that it turned on and had a menu. 0 seems a bit harsh. But the first 0 was for Olympic Hockey Nagano 98. That also seems to turn on, but the 0 in this case does appear to have been making something of a valid point. It's rated so low because it's apparently identical to Wayne Gretzky Hockey 98 in every conceivable way. The review finishes with, "We'll post a new review when Midway releases a new game." Brutal, IGN. Brutal. Number 9. First game in which you play as a cat. Alley Cat, 1983. You can all finally calm down. After we published our previous list of forgotten firsts, we were positively inundated with requests, nay, demands, to know the first game in which you play as a cat. It got so bad that James ended up trapped beneath a pile of such letters, and we didn't find him for 3 weeks. As such, allow me to apologise. Not to you, James, you knew the risks when you took on this job. But to the rest of you, well, here are some cat photos as a way of saying I'm sorry. Isn't that nice? Here's another one. Anyway, as far as we can tell, the first game where you play as a cat is Alley Cat for the Atari 8-bit and DOS, which is the version you're seeing now. It involves various cat-based scenarios: knocking a cage off a table so you can get the bird, stealing food from sleeping dogs, grabbing fish inside a fish bowl, and catching mice hiding in a giant piece of cheese. Theft, murder, and property damage. Usual cat stuff. To be fair to Freddy the cat, our feline protagonist, this whole endeavour is the result of him trying to find his love, Felicia. Though, if you ask me, it seems suspiciously like Freddy the cat is using this love thing as a flimsy justification for a crime spree. I'm onto you, Freddy. Those adorable little whiskers don't fool me. Number 8. First game to include loot boxes. Maple Story 2003. I think it's universally accepted by now that loot boxes are the absolute worst. Locking content not just behind a paywall, but behind a gambling mechanic is possibly the most corrupt thing that the gaming industry has ever done, and it's especially deplorable when it's expressly aimed at children. It seems that the game to kick off this horrendous trend was Maple Story, an MMORPG that's been going since 2003. The South Korean game was, and is still run rather popular, having generated around $3 billion in revenue over its lifetime. However, part of the reason it's made so much money is down to gashapon tickets, it says here, essentially loot boxes under a different name. They are packs of random items for which you can exchange real-world money. MapleStory seems to be the earliest game to utilize this type of monetization. Apparently, the pay-to-win aspect has been stripped back over the years, though. At least, I think it has. I'll be honest, Korean MMORPGs aren't the easiest things to understand. I mean, just look at it. I have absolutely no idea what's happening, and you don't either. Don't try and convince me otherwise. Number 7. First claymation game, Trogg 1990. In our previous Forgotten Firsts video, we talked about Reikaidoshi Chinese Exorcist, which is often thought to be the first claymation game. As we discussed, however, it actually isn't claymation, it's puppets, which got us wondering, what is the first claymation game? You'd likely think it was something like Clay Fighter on the SNES, but actually, Trogg predates it by 3 years. If you've ever played Trogg on the NES, you'll probably be quite confused, as that version of the game isn't claymation. However, the arcade version of Trogg is. Trogg is basically Pac-Man, and you don't need me to explain Pac-Man. Here, though, you play as a dinosaur that looks like it's straight out of The Simpsons, beating up cavemen. The difference between this and Pac-Man, then, is that you can actually attack your enemies at any time. As a game, it is a bit underwhelming, but its claymation is rather lovely indeed, especially for 1990. Number 6. First licensed movie tie-in game, Superman 1978. Video game movie tie-ins get a bad rap. On the one hand, they're usually abominations that should be stricken from history. On the other, Spider-Man 2?
Hey everyone!
The question is, where did the trend start? You'd think it would be Death Race from 1976, but apparently that has no relation to the film of the same name that released the year before, despite having the exact same premise and title. There's also Shark Jaws, an unlicensed Jaws knockoff from 1975. But as far as licensed tie-ins go, well, that just leaves Superman 1978. Superman for the Atari 2600, released shortly after the 1978 Christopher Reeve movie of the same name. Considering I wasn't alive in 1978, I'm not going to pass judgment on it here. Was it good? Was it bad? Who's to say? Well, us, actually, and you can find out in this video instead. Go and watch it. Not right now, just when this one's over. It perhaps goes without saying that the game doesn't look too much like the film. I've seen kids' drawings with a closer resemblance, but this was 1978. Prior maybe to 1993, I don't think anything in video games looked like anything at all. Number 5. First game to use a D-pad, Game & Watch Donkey Kong 1982. Ah, the D-pad. Part video game staple, part CD name that a bachelor calls his apartment. The 4-point cross is an iconic part of video gaming. But which game introduced it? You could say that the Microvision Cosmic Hunter handheld was the first to use a D-pad. You could even cite Blockade from 1976 for its directional buttons, but those were precursors. Similar precursors, but not quite the same design that would become standard. No, the D-pad in its truest form was built for the Game & Watch version of Donkey Kong. The NES made the D-pad famous, but the Game & Watch got there first. And like most early Nintendo innovations, the D-pad was credited to Gunpei Yokoi. Since its inception, pretty much every major console's controller has included a traditional D-pad. Until the Switch, that is, where Nintendo abandoned its own creation and instead regressed to the 4-button design. Before quickly backtracking again. It's a fixture of gaming, but it was created only so Japanese office workers could play Donkey Kong during their commute. Humble beginnings indeed. Number 4. First fully scaled open world, Courageous Perseus 1984. Now, by fully scaled open world, we mean the type of open world most common in video games today. The ones where you can freely walk across the entire singular map, rather than it being a long series of interconnected rooms or dungeons. Back in the early to mid-80s, multiple Japanese studios began laying the foundations for open-world action RPGs. The more famous innovators were Dragon Slayer from September 1984 and Hydlide from December 1984. Courageous Perseus released between these two in November, and it was the first to implement a fully scaled open world, with Dragon Slayer being much closer to a traditional dungeon crawler. Courageous Perseus is a retelling of Greek mythology, although it seems to have taken a lot from the 1981 film Clash of the Titans. If we're being honest though, the game is terrible. It may have been innovative for its time, but the gameplay consists of walking around an island and just bumping into things to damage them. It's like Ys, if Ys were designed by Satan as a form of eternal punishment. Number 3. First digital handheld console, Mattel Auto Race, 1976. While there were other portable electronic games much earlier than Mattel's Auto Race, such as Waco's Electro Tic-Tac-Toe, the key to it being classed as a video game handheld is in its digital display, and it being controlled by electronic inputs rather than mechanical ones. The two handhelds most often associated with being the earliest are the Microvision from 1979 and the Game & Watch from 1980. However, they weren't the first. Mattel's Auto Race may be primitive in its design, but what else would you expect from a handheld console from 1976? It's a simple game in which you control a speeding car, swapping between lanes to avoid other vehicles. For each vehicle you overtake, you get a point. To win, your car has to make it to the top of the screen 4 times, but the closer you are to the top, the harder it is to react to what's coming. For what it is, it seems like a fun little time killer. It's not going to get little Betty to put down her Nintendo Switch today, but it is a nifty bit of kit. Auto Race cost $25 upon release, which, adjusting for inflation, is about $120 today. Expensive, yes, but worth it to be seen as the coolest kid on the school bus back in 1976. Underwater ring toss can kiss my ass. Number 2. First game to be recalled, The Race Against Time, 1988. A video game getting recalled is never a good thing. It costs publishers a fortune and can often tarnish the reputation of the studio that made it. Today, such recalls are far more rare because pretty much every game can simply be patched after release. Back in the day, however, if something was wrong with the game, there was only one option. No, not that one. And that is what happened with The Race Against Time. You'd think the story of the earliest video game recall might be about something interesting, like the game having a severe game-breaking bug or being made out of poison. The truth is, though, that this and most recalls seem to be down to something more mundane. In the case of The Race Against Time, the athletics-themed game was released with legendary track and field athlete Jesse Owens on the cover. The problem was, studio codemasters never had the rights to use Owens' image, and as such, the game had to be recalled. Now a financial disaster, The Race Against Time was released again with Carl Lewis on the cover. What's more confusing though is that you play as neither Lewis nor Owens in the game. It's Omar Khalifa instead, which is like booting up a Metal Gear Solid game only to be playing as someone other than Snake. That'd never happen. Oh.
What did you say?
And number 1, the first video game, Turo Champ, 1948. Pinning down the first video game is tricky. For one, what defines a video game? Number 2, at what stage in its development can we classify it as one? Many believe that the first video game was Tennis for Two from 1958. Others have more recently given the nod to 1952's OXO. However, and it may be a stretch, Turo Champ from 1948 could technically be the first ever video game. Let me explain. The legendary British wartime genius Alan Turing, of Enigma Code fame, created a theoretical chess game alongside co-creator David Champernowne. The thing is, it never actually ran on a computer during either man's lifetime. Systems that could run something so complex simply didn't exist back then. So, rather than waiting for futuristic technology, they went ahead and wrote the machine code for it anyway. Yes, the first ever video game was created before any hardware could actually run it. Many years later, in 2012 in fact, a recreation of the program based on the original design was built, and it was found to function as a proper chess game, albeit a simplistic one. Turing and Champenow managed to create a functioning video game years before traditional computers even existed. They were doing that in 1948, shortly after a world war, and I spent last night eating Nutella out of the jar in my underwear. Not that it's a competition, but, it sure makes one feel inadequate.